see you all. Our first Lunch and Learn of 2025. And today's session is focused around making change last. So a big part of the TED ethos is around creating sustainable change in our teams. And a big reason why we first developed it was to give teams some structure so that they can continue change work, which they might start with an initial, maybe an OD intervention or an initial team reflection activity. So today's learning points are focused around how we can encourage sustainable change in our teams. So for us as practitioners, what we can do to help them, but also how we can help keep momentum for teams with TED, because we know for some teams that can be a challenge sometimes, and especially in the environment that they're working in the NHS at the moment. In terms of objectives, what I'm looking to get across is the benefits of a continuous improvement culture. So thinking about that CI or QI, as it's sometimes called, thinking around what is that continuous development process for teams, and how does TED align with that. We'll also be looking at some of the challenges that can make it difficult in practice, after we've looked at some of the theory behind it. But then we're going to also look at some opportunities to develop that continuous improvement culture, and what are the practical steps that teams can take, and where TED can fit in with that. Okay, so if you're anything like us that likes teaching hospitals, I know definitely prior to TED, our OD function was perhaps perceived as the go-to department for when culture or engagement breaks down. So when something goes wrong in a team, whether it be something like maybe conflict happening in a team, or maybe there's evidence of incivility happening in a team, communication breakdowns, maybe lack of staff engagement, or any other challenge which I guess was perceived as outside the norm of a traditional manager's role, we were often called in to offer support, because in the main we did have support mechanisms that could help. In our OD skill set, we have experience, we have tools, we have the ability to design bespoke workshops. We can help teams understand, reflect, and adjust their approach around a range of different topics. And for managers, we can provide things like coaching. We can help them understand different perspectives, and we can help to develop the practice through leadership development programs and other support mechanisms. So we've got things like accredited training programs, we've got apprenticeships, we might have coaching skills for managers, and I'm sure in your organizations you'll have similar mechanisms for supporting your managers. What we also had before we developed TED is we had folders upon folders of resources that we kept adapting, kept sort of merging together and changing to suit different types of teams, so that it could fit different settings and different situations. And this was a big driver for us creating TED, really, because we wanted to create a one-stop shop that could benefit both us as practitioners as well as team leaders themselves, to be able to access those tools and approaches, and advice that have been tried and tested, I guess. So when we think around how we implement those specialist skills, we aim to often we're getting teams back on track, and in the main, I think teams tend to leave work with an OD practitioner feeling positive. They'll perhaps feel more clear about their direction, around where they're headed. When someone comes to you for coaching, they might feel more self-confident, or more self-aware about their own behaviours, maybe their communication, or how they contribute to the wider culture that is in their team or in the organisation as well. And I'm sure you've all felt that satisfaction of helping teams, helping individuals overcome different types of challenges in your workplace. And that can leave you with a renewed, or it leaves team leaders with a renewed outlook on their work and how they contribute to the organisation, benefiting from your expertise, and feeling more equipped to navigate the challenges that they encounter working in the NHS. All being well, in the best case examples, you'll also be able to evidence your impact. So you'll be able to do that through things like staff survey results, maybe better performance outputs for the team, might be HR metrics, or it might be positive feedback from everyone who's involved, who is impacted by that intervention that you've gone in to do. But the challenge we often find is that in the short to medium term time frame, our interventions might appear to have an amazing impact, but there's always another challenge around the corner, and they'll come back to you again. So the challenge is that in practice, it's unfortunately the case that despite our best efforts as practitioners, the rigors of working in a pressurized environment can take its toll on even the best support interventions or change projects that you might work on. Teams who might set off with a renewed positivity can find that enthusiasm might wane over time. And I'm sure you've all seen this in teams that you've worked with, especially if you've been in your organization for a number of years. You'll have an idea of where teams perhaps go on a journey, a bit of a cycle of ups and downs throughout different challenges that they might come across. You might also find leaders who set off to manage with the best intentions might have the confidence knocked as something comes out of the blue, maybe something unexpected, or maybe they get some negative feedback that despite trying their best, they've not quite hit the mark or not had the impact that they intended to do with either team members or a piece of work that they've been working on. So the reality of that situation is that the track that our leaders, that our teams are on is really straightforward. There's lots of road bumps, lots of twists and turns in the road or in the track that they're on. And no one intervention in isolation is sustainable enough to equip them with changes to overcome of every type of obstacle. So we need to think differently. We need to think about how do we make it sustainable, and really equip teams to be able to navigate anything that could come their way. Because just before I hit the recording, we were talking about sort of ambitions or New Year's resolutions that teams might be thinking of in 2025. And the reality is in a lot of cases, teams can plan for what might happen in 2025, but there'll always be something that is unforeseen or a change up the road that is hard to understand where it might take you as a team. So we want to try and think, how can we make teams have sustainable change that can help them around those perhaps unforeseen changes that might be on the horizon. So when we think about this, there are some definite benefits from our perspective as practitioners. Firstly, thinking around firstly how we help our own capacity. I think when Sam and I talk to you about your own organisations, I think the picture is pretty much the same across all of our NHS clients, that we often have a small amount of resource to support a large amount of teams in big organisations that have ever increasing workplace challenges. Secondly, it's important because we need to reduce any repetition to try and make our work more efficient and effective. Try and ensure that we aren't delivering the same content to the same teams year after year, and we can make some of that change stick, I guess. So a sustainable approach is focused on building those teams and team leaders with the capabilities to build on maybe the initial work that we might do. And through a sustainable structure of support, it also helps us to extend our reach, so that with the enhanced capacity we get from an OD and a support perspective, we are able to reach more teams without compromising the impact that we might have. And especially on the teams that need our direct support, making sure that when we do step back that support, teams don't feel abandoned or left to go back to their old ways, that they've got something there that can help them through. And that's definitely been a big driver in what we've tried to create with TED. When we think around the benefits from a team's perspective, there's lots of research out there that highlights how a continuous improvement approach can be a catalyst for sustainable change. So firstly, thinking about enhanced efficiency. When teams do take this sort of always learning approach, a continuous improvement approach, they can regularly think of ways that they can enhance their work, that they can maybe eliminate waste or improve efficiency. They can operate more productively, maybe. A continuous improvement approach also helps to foster innovation and adaptability. So by taking the view that we'll always be changing, that we've never arrived at the best way of working, and that once we get to where we're aiming for today, we'll be able to learn something new and build on that. Teams can sort of create a culture of creativity, of flexibility, and help to enable teams to adapt to those sorts of changes or road bumps that might be down the line. In terms of boosting colleague engagement, the evidence suggests that when team members are actively involved in improvement initiatives, they feel more valued, they feel more engaged in the work that's being done, and that can lead to things like high morale, higher job satisfaction. And we see that through things like our staff survey results, where they do work in this type of manner. Our teams that sort of foster creativity, foster collaboration, and really work on the communication. Those tend to be the teams that do score higher in our engagement surveys. In terms of improved quality, CI practices help us to identify and address issues promptly. It can help to delivering better services because opportunities are recognised and teams can build on the success together. We've also got building better collaboration. So evidence suggests that when teams do have this sort of continuous improvement culture, when they regularly take time to reflect on their relationships, either inside the team or with other teams, then they can find new ways to collaborate better. And it creates that sense of shared purpose and that sense of support as well within our teams and across teams as well. And finally on there, we've got sustainable growth. And by fostering a mindset of ongoing improvement, teams and organizations can achieve sustainable growth together. So the intention is to aim for long-term success through that. So I've got a few slides here. I shared a couple of these last year, I think, or maybe been the year before, around how TED embeds that type of continuous improvement approach. And the first thing to highlight really, and something that I'm always trying to get across to team leaders, is that TED isn't intended to be a one-off intervention. The first time a team engages in TED can be useful, and it gives a team a useful baseline to measure their engagement and effectiveness. And the initial TED survey might help a team quickly identify their main strengths, key challenges that they might have. It can help them sort of measure and compare different things so they can prioritize the work that they want to do. But sometimes the first TED can be a challenge because team members might be a little bit apprehensive when first engaging with the process. It might be that a team gets derailed somewhere along the line in the first TED cycle. So having a clear plan for how TED's going to fit into a broader cycle can help give teams that confidence that however your first TED goes, you'll have another opportunity to learn and get better and keep embedding that approach, and to really sort of position it as this sort of iterative process that will go through multiple times over the series of a number of months or even years. Then that can help teams understand that it's not about getting everything right that first time. It's about getting that little bit better each time we revisit this cycle, so that we can continuously improve together. I'm sure you're probably familiar with the PDSA cycle, but really this underpins what continuous improvement work is all about. And this is something which is familiar to clinicians, project managers, educators, other professional disciplines as well. But what this does really is set out that process that you would think about trying new things. You'll plan what you want to implement. You'll have a go at it. You'll learn as you're going through that process. and then you might implement changes based on what you've learned together, and then you repeat the cycle as you go through. And this fits into what we encourage teams to do with TED. So when we train team leaders, the emphasis should be on embedding the continuous improvement cycle. Where we can see that in TED, looking at the typical TED cycle, this sets out how teams plan to do their TED work. They'll do something to understand it. So that involves the survey and the discussion that they'll be doing. They'll learn together throughout that discussion as well. And they'll take practical actions to improve their shared working together. And when implemented well and repeated regularly, that helps to create that team culture of continuous learning, shared accountability as well. It helps them to manage change. And over time, it helps to build that resilience as well. And I think that's so important for teams that have been through a lot of challenges. Taking that time to reflect on the challenges you've already overcome can help you feel more resilient when faced with future challenges or uncertainty. Last time I delivered these slides, I signposted this paper from the CIPD. It's still available on their website if you want to go and read it. But from 2023, CIPD did a study where they did a bit of a meta-analysis of all the different team engagement research that's out there. And the findings underpin the ethos behind TED, really, highlighting the importance for creating the shared space for reflection, creating a shared learning culture, and focusing on continuous development in our teams. So some of the recommendations from this research found that team dynamics are vitally important to achieve success, and thinking around what are those dynamics within your team culture, if you will. And the research highlighted how teams with poor interpersonal relationships or a lack of shared understanding would often struggle to achieve high performance or the goals that they set out to do. The research also showed that organising team knowledge, so pooling the knowledge within a team, helped to create a shared understanding of different perspectives and the opportunities that teams are presented with. And they also emphasise the importance of planned interventions. So having a planning process for how you work together as a team helped a team to develop and improve performance over time. And the last one on there was about that importance of shared goals. And definitely that's something which sits within TED, around that team purpose idea. And what some of you were saying earlier around those sort of goals for the year might be that great opportunity to align what we're doing together, and then maybe align individual objectives towards that common purpose. So what TED is there to do is to provide a mechanism for teams to be able to do this. It's not designed to sort of reinvent any of this. It's just around making it a step-by-step process to give teams that structure that they need to work on this. And the TED Toolkit provides, I guess, what we class as recognised interventions that teams can use themselves. So it guides them towards manageable goals, which are informed and agreed upon by everyone within the team, creating that shared accountability. And the TED cycle encourages teams to revisit this regularly and make those incremental gains, even through challenging times. Okay, so I've thrown a lot of points at you there, but I wanted to throw this question out to the room. So the evidence is quite compelling. I've shared sort of the model that sits behind continuous improvement, the evidence that sits behind that CIPD have found. But I wanted to ask, what's the reality in practice? So this might be with teams who you've used TED with, teams who maybe are struggling to get started with TED. And when we think about this, are there challenges maybe at different points in the TED cycle, or are there challenges between TED cycles that you're seeing from teams that you're working with? Any thoughts on that one? Janet, would you like to go in?
Yeah, I think for us, what we're finding is there's a lot of organisational change going on. So that's which is having a massive impact on lots of people. I've never known this amount of organisational change in the organisation I work in, all at the same time, and they are big changes. So people are very much, trying to find their way through that and haven't got the headspace to even contemplate any of this. The other thing that we've also come across is for those clinical areas, they are being managed and constantly asked for figures all around those targets in clinical care, and therefore there is little or no emphasis given or permission given from senior managers to spend time supporting them to look after themselves, or them to say, actually do some work as a team. It's all around the patient care, so therefore they don't feel permission to. And a lot of it within our organisation at the moment is linked to the financial constraints. So they are big hurdles which we're trying to actually get over at the moment.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Janet. And I think a lot of people on the call will be able to sort of resonate with that. I think definitely in our organisation, similar things, things like vacancy freezes, sort of external challenges for teams that are outside your control, and that feeling of really stretched resources, whether it be time to do something like this, or whether it's resources in terms of the numbers to be able to do the jobs that they're there to do, as well as give themselves capacity to take that time to reflect. Yeah, definitely good examples. And any other thoughts from anyone? Hazel, I've noticed you put in the chat, some teams are so busy firefighting, getting through each day, they feel they don't have time or capacity to look at CI changes ahead. Yeah, do you want to come in, Hazel, and just sort of expand on that a little bit? What sorts of things have you seen?
There are just some teams that we're trying to engage with TED, but they're just so frantically busy. They're very much frontline workers that they're struggling to find the time to fit it in. So we're just trying to encourage them to contemplate it and to see how they might fit it in. But I think their headspace is so much in that survival mode, especially at the moment, that they're just not engaging with the process. So we're thinking, I'm going to try again with them after winter pressures have calmed. But it's kind of that there's a bit of a wall there to get through.
Absolutely. Yeah, and thanks for sharing. And again, I think that's something which we can all resonate with. I think particularly at this time of year in clinical areas, that we're in that winter pressures time of year, and the thought of doing something extra on top of all the other stuff that you've got can feel quite daunting from a team's perspective, and from a team leader's perspective as well. When you've got a team that's really struggling, the thought of doing something extra just seems a bit too big to work on. And I think that illustrates the challenge that we have sometimes, that although we know, and I think most of the time I see team leaders buy into the idea and the sort of model of TED, or the model of continuous improvement. They'll agree that it's the right way to be. But in reality, the practice is very much that firefighting that you've mentioned in the chat, that idea that, we need to put that fire out, move on to the next problem and work on that before we can get that time and space to reflect. So yeah, definitely agree with that. Denise, would you like to go in?
Yeah, I was just going to say we're just at the beginning of our journey, having only just been trained as practitioners, and I can identify with what the challenges that people have raised. But what I would say from our organisation's perspective is that there's really, really good uptake for people wanting to be trained as team leaders. So we're hoping for positive things.
Lovely. Oh, that's really good to hear. Yeah, and I think it's important to try and harness that energy as well, and particularly when you first set out, if you can really try and create that buzz around it and create that momentum with your initial teams, then that can take you a long way. So yeah, really, really great to hear that. Thanks, Denise. Megan, would you like to go in?
Thank you. Yeah, just a thought as well with the way that the TED cycle works. It kind of requires resurveyed to maintain that continuous learning. And I think that's something that sometimes can be more difficult to encourage people kind of potentially lose momentum after the first survey. I think using the TED tools and trying to highlight, we try to do TED tool spotlights, that kind of thing, to kind of keep engagement with the tools, so that hopefully then that engagement with the resurvey also comes out. But yeah, in terms of the TED cycle itself, I think that can be a challenge, is getting the resurvey on the horizon, as well as the actual first survey that people do.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, great point. I think sometimes teams might benefit from maybe your support or someone's support, or that energy that they have the first time they try something new. I think sometimes that gets them through that first cycle. But you're absolutely right. Sometimes when it comes to the second TED cycle, that's when they start to drop off. And I've seen lots of examples of teams who've maybe set out with great ambitions and they've come up with some great action plans, but then they're reluctant to do the second TED until they've completed everything on their list, and they're sort of putting it off for that time when, maybe that perfect time when, everything has calmed down, and, the time that never arrives. And for NHS teams, we definitely know. But yeah, great example there. Some of the things you can do is keep reminding them about the tools that are available. Of, it's not just about doing a survey, Ted. It might be, before you get to your next survey, let's have a go at a different type of tool, or try something different that might be really relevant for where we are now as a team. Great examples, thank you. Christine, would you like to go in?
Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Megan. Yeah, just following on what Megan just mentioned, resurvey is a big area that we're trying to focus this year. On the other note, I think what I have seen the challenge so far with the TED journey is that, like we already discussed, it might take a lot for a manager to decide to go on a TED journey, to do a survey with the team, because some of the leaders might feel like, actually, this is almost like running a 360 to me. Now, that step, they took the step and do the survey. However, the result didn't come back quite not very positive. Obviously highlighted a number of areas that they will need to work on, and I find that there's a couple of occasions that where leadership score was really, really low, but before we even get to an opportunity to trying to explore what leadership actually does the team mean here, we have them really quickly switch off from it. So we don't have that often. We have leaders that actually will go, right, the team is not happy, we need to do something about it, and we will improve our leadership as well. And then those are the teams that you will see improvement comes in really quickly in a very short space of time, because leaders are acknowledged that actually we need to do something about it. The teams are not satisfied. On the other note, like my challenge is that the team leaders that walked away because they have seen the result, but without really trying to understand and interpret the result, and then just disengage with our TED coaches completely. I feel like those are the teams that we know is a challenging team that we need to work with. But if the leaders isn't quite ready, what else could we do? If that makes, sorry, I'm not making sense here.
Yeah, no, you make perfect sense. Yeah. Good example, Christine. I think definitely one of the challenges that can arise throughout a team's TED cycle is if that feedback comes back and the leader doesn't feel equipped to be able to deal with it, or maybe they don't agree with it themselves, then they sort of lose that interest in taking it forward. So I think in some cases it is that how can we offer extra support? So it might be through coaching, it might be getting a bit more hands-on with the team and helping work through that situation if there is a breakdown there between the team and its leader. And I think definitely this idea of momentum, if we can get them through to that next TED cycle and try to reassure them that if this is your first one, that's your baseline, and if that's your starting point, then the opportunity to improve is greater. You know, if something is lower, it's actually a great opportunity to improve. And often, if there is a negative score in there, it can be one of the things which you really can work on and start to see improvements with through TED. But I think what this also highlights is the challenge with, if you're leaving TED a long time, if it feels like there is a burning issue, then sometimes leaving it 12 months to repeat might be a bit too long sometimes for a team or a team leader. And I think, Christina, remember, I think it was earlier on last year, you shared an example of a team who'd done 2 TEDs about 12 weeks apart, something like that. And they'd seen some great success by doing TED again quite quickly after the first one, so that they could see the impact of the work that they'd done very quickly. They used TED as a way of getting feedback to see if the things we tried had worked or not. And that sort of really helped get them that momentum. So I think that's a great example of how a team can adapt the process to a way that suits them. And obviously not every team can do it that frequently, but what I would encourage teams and team leaders to think around is, how can you flex this to meet the needs of your specific team? But most of all, how can you keep that momentum going? Because if everything doesn't go right with your first one, that's okay. Use it to build on, use it to learn together, and keep going with it, because the more momentum you build up, the easier it will get as you build that culture of continuous improvement in the team. Thank you everyone for sharing, and I'll tell you, Sharon, you put in the chat, having difficulty engaging teams who don't have IT access. Yeah, so sometimes there might be technological barriers in there, thinking around, you know, how can we get everyone to fill in the survey? And I think again, it's around different teams thinking about their own situation and thinking, what's the best way can we do this? I know with some of our domestics teams, we've actually gone out to them with iPads and been there while they filled them in. It's not the sort of most efficient use of time and resource, but if it can help give them that bit of momentum, then that might help them go through it. And I also know some teams who've had like they've blocked out one of the IT rooms maybe and had set computers so that people can go in and fill them all in the same day. There are different ways, I guess I'm saying, that teams can flex it. But yeah, I think you've all raised some very sort of real examples that, although the theory behind this is sound, and although I think pretty much on the main, us as practitioners will buy into this as an approach, the reality can be much more tricky than just applying a continuous improvement model to a team and saying, okay, work this way and it will work out. It's not that easy in practice. Denise, would you like to come in at that point? Oh, you're on mute, Denise.
Sorry, just a quick question. You know, on the actual questionnaire, you know, the free text boxes, I just thought, is there a limit to, you know, to how many words that can go in that box?
Yeah, good question. I don't think there is. I can't say as I've ever reached the limit. And I have seen some really long text that people have put in, so that I don't think there is a fixed limit. I'm sure if I speak to our developers, there probably will be a limit, but it might be so high that I've never come across it.
I don't foresee it being a problem, but it's just that I manage exit questionnaires and we have an external company that does that. And I noticed that somebody had put in 400 words is not enough to say what I'm saying. I thought, oh, that's the first time they've come across that. And I thought, so that's why it raised the question here.
Yeah, but I suppose that's another good example of what could be a barrier sometimes, is sometimes TED might not feel to a team like it's really given enough scope to address the issues that they might have. It, you know, it's quite basic in terms of what it asks, and there's only 2 open text questions unless you've got some trust specific ones, so it might not give the scope. But I think what we try to encourage through TED is really the survey, just the sort of starting point. It's just the prompt so that you can have the conversation and to open that up. And I think what I'll get into as I go on to future slides is thinking around, okay, how can you make this manageable? So it might not be about tackling everything all at once. And the reality is most teams can't tackle everything. So it's thinking around what's manageable, what's sustainable for us. But great point, Denise. Got another hand up. Sharon, would you like to go in?
Hi, thank you.
Hi.
Sorry, just going back to our issue, I should say, with domestics and facilities.
Yeah.
The biggest issue is the fact that lots of those staff members don't have email addresses. So it's not that we can't go round and take an iPad and ask them to complete it there and then, or, you know, book out an IT room, but they don't physically have work email addresses even to be able to send the link to them. And I was just wondering if anybody had come across that before, and whether there were any practical ideas of how to get around that.
Yeah, I think it is a relevant challenge, and I think a lot of organisations will see that in certain staff groups that just aren't sort of able to access that. What I'll say is I'll throw that open to one of our next coffee catch-ups, but I might be able to share some things for you on ways that we've tried. But also I think something I'd also perhaps encourage teams like that to do is think around, are there any of the toolkits that we can use even if we haven't yet found a way to do the survey? Are there tools that would benefit us? Or are there other ways that we can canvass opinion, whether it be ways we can build on the staff survey, or are there other non-tech ways that we can canvass opinion on some of the core topics? And maybe you might use some of the TED questions in something like I don't know, a suggestion box exercise or something like that. But yeah, I'll share some ideas with you. Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, I think what we've identified though, there's lots of different things that can derail this type of process. And I think some of the things that I see quite often, sometimes there's resistance to change. So you might have people in the team who prefer the status quo. They might resist new processes or ideas. Sometimes that's from a fear of the unknown. Sometimes it might be to do with not wanting to get outside the comfort zone. And sometimes it might be because team members are skeptical about how change can benefit them. Sometimes it might be that there's a lack of alignment in terms of the way changes are, I guess, communicated. So it's really important in making things sustainable that the sort of goals are aligned with what the team's there to achieve, and that everybody's sort of on board with it. So I think it's important to think about that alignment, and that's why team purpose has a sort of a big place in TED and a lot of our toolkits. Next one there's around organizational silos. So sometimes departments or teams working in isolation might hinder the flow of information, and this can happen between individuals as well as on a team level. So it's important we think around how we can break down that sort of silo working and improve communication across what we do. Limited resources is on there. I think a few of you mentioned that whether it be time, whether it be staffing, just capacity to engage with something like this can often be a barrier to getting started with something. And I think although most team leaders I speak to will agree that it would be the best practice if they had capacity, the reality is they just don't have the time to step back from the challenges that they face, because it does feel like they're firefighting. And final one there is around complacency. So sometimes, and this might be the team that maybe gets to the second TED, sometimes after initial improvements have been made, teams can sometimes become complacent and they might stop seeking future improvements. And it's really important that teams think around how can we maintain momentum, but also keep it interesting as well. TED doesn't need to be the same each and every time you come back to it. You can start to think around how can we innovate, how can we try something a little bit different, and be willing to maybe get it wrong once or twice, and that's okay. So just to sort of illustrate this, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with Tuckman's team development curve. I think I was on a call with Claire from East Kent this morning. I think you mentioned it, that it was in one of your programs and you were sort of using it. So very sort of widely recognized model, been around since the 60s, and we still sort of embed it into a lot of leadership programs, team development programs, and it still sort of holds sort of sound today. And I think if we think about the journey a team goes on, I think you can sort of see a lot of these stages in how teams develop. And I like to describe TED as a way of trying to make the storming dip, a little bit more shallow when you're going through your team development curve. So having a structure to support a team through that storming phase can help to build that resilience and engagement towards any goals. So as a model, this is a really good way of understanding team dynamics, but actually, again, sort of differentiating between the sort of rhetoric and the reality, the sort of theory and the practice of this sort of thing is, in reality, when teams reach their peak, they'll quickly set their sights on revised goals and ambitions. So even if you achieve your goals, odds are you'll then start to look at the next thing. It's just the same in personal development as it is in team development, that there'll always be a new horizon that you look into. So where the initial model might highlight the 5 different stages, in reality, typical teams move through these stages again and again and again. And when we look at that over time, sustainable development and continuous improvement is about embracing the idea that there's going to be ups and downs along the way. The challenge is in keeping faith that when your team might dip, so maybe it's not as good as it was 6 months ago or 12 months ago, that there will be another peak on the way. And if you keep working with it, you keep that open communication, you can keep building towards your next highs, and they will be better than the previous ones were. And I think this really highlights that value of being able to reflect back on the past and think, actually, there's probably a lot of areas that have improved. And I think sometimes when we're under pressure in teams, it's easy to just focus on the things that have maybe declined from how they used to be, when actually there's perhaps an awful lot of ways that teams have improved. And I think no more so than at the moment when NHS teams do feel super stretched, they feel sort of time sort of weak in terms of the amount of time they've got. Teams are having to work in new and effective and efficient ways. They're having to innovate the ways that they work, and in many ways, because they've had to do that, they've improved their working practices to help them out with that. So recognizing that sometimes can help give a team the resilience to deal with future challenges and current challenges as well. I wanted to signpost the book Atomic Habits. I think some of you might have read it. It's been in the bestsellers list for a number of years now, but essentially this is a personal development book, but a lot of this can apply to the way teams might approach development, and something I would encourage teams to think about when they're setting their objectives. So we talked earlier on about maybe New Year's resolutions for teams. And this is some of the advice I'd encourage teams, particularly if it's your first TED, to keep in mind when you're setting out your goals. So the first one there is about starting small. So encourage your teams to think around what are the incremental changes. It's not about revolutionizing the way that you work, particularly when you might be particularly stretched. Tiny habits can compound over time and can lead to bigger improvements. So, for example, a team might decide they're going to start every day with a 5-minute reflection on what's gone well, what can be improved. I'm thinking about Lindsay just before this. We had a team meeting, which we have every Monday, where as a team we talk around what we're currently working on, and we sort of give our top 3 things that we're focused on this week, and that helps us to share our understanding of what we're working on, but it also helps us to understand the challenges we face together as well. So it helps to bring us together. Second point there is about just that, having clear goals and expectations. So ensuring that everybody understands what your team's aiming for and has that clear communication of how it aligns with what I do as an individual maybe, or what the next person is doing that contributes to my work together for the team. Third point there is around consistency being key. So a big part of building these atomic habits is establishing regular routines. So it might be things like a weekly check-in or feedback sessions, but think of ways that you can build and reinforce positive habits. So that positive reinforcement is really important, particularly in the early days of a change. So it might be, how are you going to give praise for embedding these habits? How are you going to recognize individual achievements? And that might be things such as making a point of saying thank you to different team members for contributing to the changes you're trying to implement. It doesn't need to be anything sort of grand. It can be quite simple. Number 5 on there, lead by example. So I'd encourage leaders to think around how are you going to role model the changes what you want to see in your team members. So how are you going to be that standard bearer? And what that also does is it helps you to encourage accountability, because you can hold team members to account if you're demonstrating those values, those behaviours that you'd agreed on together. And it also means that it doesn't all have to be the team leader's responsibility. It can be about team members holding each other accountable, and encouraging each other to be accountable for the behaviours together. And some of that might involve celebrating progress. So around that recognition again, it helps to boost morale, but helps to reinforce that you're on the right journey. And then final point there is encourage teams to embrace adaptability. So be willing to adapt your strategy as needed, and having one plan for the year can be useful, but being open to the idea that that plan could change after a few months. So we might need to flex again. We might need to relook at what we're trying if we feel something's going off track, or if something new comes to light, a new piece of information or a change in the way we work as a team. So integrating these types of principles into a team environment can help to create positive and effective work environments that drives that continuous improvement and success. So to help teams discuss this and raise awareness of the journey that they're on, our latest TED toolkits are designed to really try and embed this into a team's culture. Actually, a lot of the TED toolkits do sort of focus on this continuous improvement in practice. So there's much more than just these two, but our 2 newest resources are specifically designed to outline that continuous improvement process. And it helps team leaders and teams think around how they might do different things that can help embed that change process. So it might be things like appointing change agents, so members of the team to be, I think I've heard them called cultural architects before in the past. It might be around how you develop clear plans so that everyone is clear on the direction they're heading, or it might be how you implement those communication strategies to make sure everybody's included and involved in the process together as a team. So those 2 new toolkits, if you search in TED for the team journey, the first one will come up there around sustaining the change cycle, and the second one there is around giving team leaders a step-by-step guide for how to embed this. But as I say, these aren't the only toolkits that deal with that continuous improvement approach, and there's lots of different ones that can help you with that approach. Okay, so key takeaways then that I'm trying to get across in this session, and my intention is to sort of tweak this session and make a version for team leaders through our YouTube channel and other sort of communication mechanisms. But the key takeaways really that I want to try and get across to team leaders is start small. Encourage your teams to start small, because quick wins are often more attainable, but they're definitely more sustainable as well. And by thinking of the small things that will set the foundation for your good practice, that can help to build confidence, build competence in teams, and help teams get that momentum going forward. Also, encourage your teams to think around how you're going to reinforce those positive behaviours. So, are there ways that you can recognise when it's going well, that you can give credit to individuals and credit to the team when you do embed these things well? And that might be through revisiting your TED and giving the team credit for the things that have improved. But there are other ways, and again, some of our TED toolkits will help teams think around how they celebrate success. And final point there is try and encourage momentum over time. So remind teams that TED isn't intended to be a one-off. The idea is you'll build on it each time you revisit it. And by embedding positive habits, you can set the platform for larger changes to come. Okay, so just about coming to the end there, but I did want to just invite your feedback through it. So I think my colleague Lindsay might be able to pop a link in the chat, or you can scan the QR code on screen. We're always keen to get your feedback so that we can continuously improve with our learning sessions. Thanks, Lindsay. That's just in the chat now. But let us know how you found today's session. Let us know if there's any future topics that would help you or the teams that you work with work on TED. And as I say, we're always keen to keep offering you things that will be relevant to you and your teams. And finally, just to signpost you to our upcoming events. So our next Lunch and Learn, we've got one towards the end of February, Friday the 27th. And we've got our regular monthly coffee catch-ups coming up on the 20th of February and on Friday the 14th of March. We've tried to change the days of our coffee catch-ups this year so that it gives more colleagues opportunity to engage with those. So we'd love to see you there. And then in March, we'll be doing our first quarterly deep dive for 2025, where we'll look at some of the data that we're getting across all of our organisations in TED and some of the sort of bigger topics that you can get involved in as well. Okay, so thank you everyone for coming. It's been lovely to see you all, and I look forward to seeing you again. Oh, Denise, would you like to come in before we wrap up?
Yeah, just a quick.
Go on.
Just a quick one. These upcoming events, do we just get in? Will you send out sort of an automatic invite for those? Absolutely, yeah. So those of you that are new, we will add you to our distribution list, so you'll get an invite to those events. And as I'm always keen to point out, they're not mandatory, so if you can't come, don't worry. We record most of them, so they'll be available on our YouTube channel. But if you're available, it's lovely to see you and lovely to get you involved as well. So yeah, we'll be sending that out. Thanks, Denise. Thanks, everyone. Lovely to see you all, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Right.
Thank you.